Welcome to our weekly program, The Inside Story of Chabad in America through the Mindel Archives. I mentioned the last few weeks about certain points of the Rebbe, certain principles, guidelines, and Divrei Tzadikim Kayomim Lo'ad, the Shita the Rebbe holds, and that's the Shita for all the time. So here I found a letter. Now, the Rebbe had correspondence with the chief rabbi of England, Rabbi Jacobowitz. And there is a whole file, and the Rabbi Mindel had to do with this, a whole file back and forth, the Rebbe and the chief rabbi. And the chief rabbi didn't feel about Israel, now it's talking about Eretz Yisrael, but giving back land, not giving back land, shtochim. So the Rebbe has a shita. And the Rebbe wrote to him, and he, I guess, probably did not agree with something. So the Rebbe wrote to him letters, which I'm not going to do those letters, but I'm going to do the PS. And instead of explaining it, I want to read it inside, so you see exactly what the Rebbe feels about it. And this is to Rabbi Jacobowitz, the chief rabbi. The Rebbe, the PS. This PS follows in English, consistent with our previous correspondence on this subject, which was conducted in English. I can no longer delay my response to some points in our correspondence, which are as yet unanswered. The reason for the delay being that I had hoped that there would be some positive developments that would have a bearing on them. These, my hopes, have not materialized. Indeed, the situation has further deteriorated. To begin with, the basic point, namely the question of returning the liberated areas of Yehuda and Shomron. I maintain, as I have insisted from the beginning, that according to halacha, it is forbidden to return any of these territories. The same applies to the vital oil wells in Sinai. This is on the Yom Kippur War, which should not have been surrendered. The claim that for the sake of peace, it is halachically justifiable to surrender the territories and the oil wells is hollow. For what was gained was not real lasting peace, but the promise of peace on paper, and the Rebbe underlined on paper. And from past and present experience, it is well known that such paper promises are worth. Since the surrender of the oil wells is now a fait accompli, and the consequences have already become quite evident, it can well serve as an illustration of the misguided arguments that had been employed in regard also to the other points of the controversy. When I warned, the Rebbe writes, that surrendering the oil wells meant giving up a most vital resource, both in time of peace and even more so in time of emergency, and that it would create a serious stranglehold both on the economy and security of the land. The answer was, firstly, that there was a 3 months reserve of oil, a physical impossibility, he writes, in the prevailing circumstances. That's firstly. And secondly, a promise from the other side to supply all the petroleum needs, yet soon after the surrender of the oil wells, emissaries had to be dispatched to Mexico and elsewhere in effort to obtain oil. At inflated, this is a parenthesis, at inflated prices and costly transportation. More recently, it was necessary to negotiate contracts for the importation of coal from distant countries, South Africa, Australia. This further emphasizes the seriousness of the energy situation in Eretz Yisrael. Similarly, shortly before the current visit of the Prime Minister and his entourage to Washington, a personal friend of mine who spoke to a personal friend of his, one who participated in all the Camp David negotiations and will participate in the upcoming Washington discussions, and stated quite clearly that serious mistakes has been made in signing the treaty, since the same objective, normalization, could have been obtained without surrendering all that has been surrendered. The latter replied, "Let's not go further into it," and added that the ways and means are now being implored to move away from that policy. To refer to a further point of our discussion, namely, my criticism of the government policy regarding terrorist attack is responsive to which I was taken to task for accusing the government of collusion with the terrorists, which is, of course, entirely untrue. My criticism was only that the departments, the Rabbi writes over here, the Rabbi crossed out, and he writes with his handwriting, many departments, government. I could mention a few recent events to support my contention, but will cite only two. First, while it has long been common knowledge, though not discussed publicly, it was recently publicized in the media that in his name, Ben-Gurion gave a directive to stop the search of Dr. Mengele, Yamach Shmoi, right when the search had become intensive. That's number one. Secondly, even more recently, the controversy in connection with the excavations in the old city of David, there is no need to point out what the attitude and treatment showed by the police, with the backing of higher ups, has been towards the demonstrations against this desecration. Yet, when there was an Arab demonstrations in other place, but in a similar situation, the newly discovered tunnel under Temple Mount, further exploration immediately stopped. No further commentary is necessary. Another recent development bore out a view I expressed during Yom Kippur War. I urged then, on the basis of halacha, to pursue the enemy ad ridito, and the Rebbe brings down the Mara Mikemis, namely to take Damascus, not for occupation, but to ensure that it never again would pose a threat. It was then also common knowledge that Soviet advisors were present there with headquarters. Only a few hours of occupation would have been sufficient to accomplish the task. But for strange reasons, it was not done. The results of the failure are evident and have been particularly underscored recently by the moving of the Soviet SAMs and the military actions that were necessary to counter Soviet penetration, including the bombing of the nuclear reactor in Iraq. Though the latter action shows a solid departure from the policy of appeasement. Now the last paragraph. Finally, a more personal point. Hence, it comes to the last in reference to the accusation that Lubavitch instigated or participated in the demonstration against the chief rabbi on his visit here. Be it noted that it is the accepted rule in all civilized legal systems, not to mention the halacha, that the burden of proof is on the accuser and not on the accused, and that everyone is deemed innocent until proven guilty, especially in regard to Jews who are all becheskas kashrus. Yet this elementary principle, the Rebbe wrote something I can read. Various rabbinical organizations came out public against the chief rabbi, while Lubavitch was the one that did not come out against the chief rabbi. And then the Rebbe here gives him write a whole letter, and then the Rebbe gives him a bracha. The reason I read it today because the Rebbe's shita is the shita, and we can see it today in Eretz Yisrael. That shita that the Rebbe holds also applies today in another way, but it's the same thing. And next week we'll continue our weekly program. Thank you.